Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, we will be breaking down all things roster cutdown related, including cuts already made, thoughts on key position battles, and outside trade candidates the Bills could consider as they trim their roster down to 53. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. And Dave, we have made it through all of the offseason drama. This has been one of the longest off seasons in Buffalo Bills history. It has just dragged on and on and on. But we are now one day away from cutting the roster down to 53 men. And then the Buffalo Bills will play like 17 days later on September 11th or something like that. I think I might have the days wrong, but it's still a long ways away and we'll have to wait. Yeah. 2 weeks from tonight. So 14 days away, the Buffalo Bills will finally officially kick off their season in the Meadowlands against the New York Jets. But the Bills have already trimmed their roster to 80. Brandon Beane usually breaks news on a Monday for us. He didn't break any news. He broke some yesterday. He has not broken any today. No Buffalo Bills have been released today, but they have trimmed the roster down to 80. Wide receivers Des Patman and Isaiah Coulter have been waived. Tight end Jay Sternberger, Garrett McGinn, the offensive tackle, Cortez Broughton, the defensive tackle, Deshaun White, the linebacker, and Jared Maiden, the safety, have also been waived by the Buffalo Bills. What are your thoughts on these early cuts, if any?
I mean, you knew the wide receiver situation was always going to be a numbers game. I mean, Des Patman, we talked about him a number of times, right, on this show during the summer, and kind of always lumped him in that same group with Marcel Aitman. I think maybe Marcel Aitman now has an inside track to potentially landing up on the practice squad, but we'll see what happens about that. Jay Sternberger, obviously that's maybe the most recognizable name of the group based on sort of our drive coverage of years past and sort of the signing of him in the summer. I thought he had some opportunities in that Bears game. There was certainly one play in the second half where Kyle Allen, I thought, threw a really, really nice ball and he just couldn't hold on to it. And that may have just been all they needed to see from him, unfortunately, because the Bills are not necessarily a super tight end heavy personnel shop as it is as far as the roster is considered. And it's likely that they wanted to maybe give him another chance, but a little surprised, and we'll see if maybe he comes back on the practice squad after cut downs are made. That would not surprise me if he comes back in that capacity. But yeah, obviously a different situation this year where there's not the gradual sort of slow burn down with the cuts. It's going straight from 90, now 80 down to the 53. So the Bills getting ahead of the game and trying to make their lives a little bit easier so they don't have to do it all tomorrow.
The only one that really stuck out to me yesterday was, you mentioned Jay Sternberger. I think that interests me in the fact that they released Jay Sternberger so early that might be an indication that Joel Wilson is the tight end that they're favoring on the practice squad over Jay Sternberger.
Yep.
And the other one that really stuck out to me was Des Patman, because Des Patman was a guy who, before we drafted Justin Shorter, I think would have been one of the training camp darlings. I think he's a guy that a bunch of people might have pounded the table for to make the Buffalo Bills 53 man if Justin Shorter did not exist, but he does here because the Buffalo Bills drafted him. He had a really good first game, and then I don't think he took another snap. And I sort of pondered after the Bears game, or as the Bears game was going on, I'm like, are the Buffalo Bills trying to hide Des Patman so they can put him on the practice squad? And then releasing him yesterday early with this list of 10 guys doesn't exactly bury him like it would the guys who are waived right at the wire, right at the deadline. So maybe Des Patman is not one of those guys that the Buffalo Bills are considering for the practice squad. Maybe that honor goes to somebody like Tyrell Shavers, who has gunning experience and also is that size guy, or maybe even Keyshawn Johnson, who has performed well this preseason as well. So those are the two that stuck out the most to me. And then poor Isaiah Coulter, I don't think he took a snap at all this preseason. He was injured, and obviously Garrett McGinnon, Deshaun White were Buffalo Bills for all of like 4 days. Those guys, poor guys as well. But tonight's objective is to sort of project the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster. So once we get through our ad break here and we hype up Picasso's Pizza a little bit, we're going to be going position by position, and we're sort of going to talk about what the Buffalo Bills still have left on their 80-man roster and where we think the Buffalo Bills might start to trim some players, who's going to make the 53, who's not going to make the 53. There could possibly be some trade candidates as well. So that's what the whole purpose and the function of tonight's show is going to be. Our weekly challenge for this week, too, is when this show is over, in the comment section, comment on this video with your hottest roster take heading into cutdown day. So you got about not even 24 more hours. You got about 16 more hours to call your shot. I'm seeing a lot of Alec Andersons today, right? There's some people, some Andy Isabellas. There's some late push for Kingsley Jonathan. Whatever your hottest roster take is, get it into the comment section of this show when it is done airing live before tomorrow, so you can screenshot it and brag to all your buddies if you are correct. And we'll make sure we're in the comment section over the course of the week, interacting with you guys as well, for those of you who missed the live show and have to catch us on demand. But before we get things kicked off, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, Dave, let's get into it, and let's start our 53-man conversation with the quarterbacks. And obviously, unlike the Arizona Cardinals, who Jonathan Gannon came out today and said, for a competitive advantage, we are not going to name our starting quarterback today after cutting Colt McCoy. Between what they have left in Josh Jacobs and Clayton Thune, the Buffalo Bills have announced their starting quarterback. It's Josh Allen. That's not the question that the Buffalo Bills have to answer heading into week 1. However, I think there is some questions surrounding quarterback 2. I'm not ready to call Kyle Allen a roster lock, despite the fact that he has had some good moments the past 2 weeks, because quite frankly, he missed some gimmies last week. And on top of that, all the reports out of training camp is he hasn't looked that great. And the Buffalo Bills have never really, the coaching staff and Brandon Beane have really never seemed too enthused with Kyle Allen. It seems like he was just kind of like there. He was Josh Allen's buddy. So they sort of, they signed him and they brought him into camp because he has experience under his belt. There's a lot of people in the Cover One community, Aaron, Greg, Uber, they've been very vocal today on social media about just how little they care about quarterback 2 and how quarterback 2 doesn't matter. But I still want to have this conversation because, number one, backup quarterbacks don't matter until they do. I mean, if Josh Allen, knock on wood, goes down for the season, of course the backup quarterback doesn't matter. Our season's over. But if Josh Allen were to miss a week or two, having a solid backup quarterback who can maybe go 500 or steal you both of those games, that could be the difference between winning the AFC East and not. That could be the difference between making the playoffs and not. So I would, if the Buffalo Bills don't feel comfortable and confident in Kyle Allen, I would like to see the Buffalo Bills pursue a different backup quarterback. But what are your thoughts before we get into the trade candidates and the waiver wire candidates? What are your thoughts on Kyle Allen? Should the Buffalo Bills just roll with him as their QB2?
My head says yes. I think at this stage in the game, I know he's had some struggles throughout camp, and I know he's missed some gimmies, but I also think he's had some pretty good moments, and I also think there's been some situations where he hasn't gotten a lot of help from his guys. And again, obviously the guys that he's throwing to a lot of times have been guys at the bottom of the roster, outside of, guys like Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, guys like that are kind of like the fringe roster guys, right? But I just feel like at this stage in the game, unless you want to bring someone in who really you are going to take the time to bring up to speed in the hopes that maybe Josh Allen nothing happens to Josh Allen, obviously, this season, but, early in the season, especially, then that's something. However, the Bills had a fairly decent chance to sign a lot of different backup quarterbacks in free agency, and they decided to go with Kyle Allen. Now, one thing that I think is potentially interesting is the roster gymnastics the Bills could do with Kyle Allen, knowing there's likely not a strong market for
Mhm.
him if he were to get cut. And Matt Perino and his 53-man prediction kind of floated this idea of cutting Kyle Allen so that they could put a guy on the 53, whether it's Connor McGovern or Balen Spector or something like that, who they could then put on IR
Mhm.
as a post roster cut down move so that that person wouldn't miss the entire season and then come back and then just re-sign Kyle Allen back to the roster after that. Now,
Mhm.
I don't hate that idea. In my prediction, I'm not going there. I am going to put Kyle Allen
Yeah.
on the 53, but it is an interesting thought process on how to do some roster gymnastics to
Mhm.
essentially put a guy who's injured on IR, but not season-ending IR. So that I thought was pretty interesting. Kyle Allen being the guy whose expense that would be at.
Charles G coming in. He says, all I know is whether it's Kyle Allen or insert backup QB2, the Vegas line wouldn't change much or at all. Essentially saying any quarterback that's out there would be within the margin of error of Kyle Allen. I don't disagree with that sentiment, especially as a fan. Like, if the Buffalo Bills decide to roll with Kyle Allen as QB2, I know that, like, really it doesn't make a difference compared to anyone else who's out there. The reason why I sort of want to go through this thought experiment and talk about it is because what if the Buffalo Bills disagree? What if the Buffalo Bills, and based on their body language and some of the things that they've said, I think maybe there is a case you could make that they really aren't big Kyle Allen believers and they might legitimately be shopping for another quarterback. Joe Biscaglia, in his final 53-man roster prediction, had the Buffalo Bills trading for Case Keenum. And John Robert comes in and he makes a great comment. He says Case Keenum didn't play great the season before, meaning last season. He told the media it was week 2 before he really knew the scheme. So maybe it's all about giving Kyle Allen some time. And that's why, if the Buffalo Bills do decide to make a change at QB2, I think there's only 3 names that make sense to me in terms of players they'd feel confident cutting Kyle Allen and putting this player on the roster week 1. Because if Josh Allen does go down mid-game, that quarterback has to have a decent knowledge of our scheme. That's not going to be Phillip Walker. That's not going to be Will Grier. That's not going to be Colt McCoy or any of these other players who are getting waived today. The 3 guys that make sense for this would be Case Keenum, knows our scheme. He was our backup quarterback last year. He could be available via trade. Or Pittsburgh, Mitch Trubisky. He was our backup quarterback 2 years ago. He has a decent understanding of this scheme. Those are the 2 players that maybe the Buffalo Bills could pursue. I would throw Mason Rudolph in there as well, just because the Buffalo Bills had interested him as a backup plan, a fallback plan, if they couldn't get their hands on Josh Allen in the 2018 draft. So you know that they like Mason Rudolph as well. So those are the 3 that I think that they would maybe feel comfortable trading some draft assets for. I don't think they would want to trade a lot of draft assets, nothing more than a 6th or a 7th round pick. But that being said, I think one alternative to start thinking about too is PJ Walker is available. Will Grier had a really promising preseason. He's available. Um, Nathan Rourke has been waived as well. Obviously, the Buffalo Bills, I don't think, are going to make a claim on Will Grier. They're not going to make a claim on Nathan Rourke. But if those 2 players clear waivers, and PJ Walker was a vested veteran, so he's just a free agent now, the Buffalo Bills could pursue one of those 3 guys or a player like them to come be a veteran on the practice squad, as opposed to having Matt Barkley. Because you can IR Matt Barkley, who's got the elbow injury. He can still be around the locker room, helping Josh Allen and do all that all those different things. But if you have a quarterback like PJ Walker or Will Grier or Nate Rourke on the practice squad, those are some rather decently upside players who maybe by week 6, 7, or 8 could challenge Kyle Allen to be quarterback 2.
That's true. Although I would be surprised if Will Grier's not on Dallas's practice squad. But
By
again,
all indications were that they were, because they have Cooper Rush, they have Trey Lance, and they have Dak Prescott. So the report I read was Dallas gave him that entire final preseason game to let him audition for another team.
fair
So
enough.
I don't think
And
Will Grier probably sees much of a future in Dallas. He doesn't have to automatically revert to the Cowboys practice squad. He can choose a different one.
true, he can. I would imagine though, he did play pretty well in that Raiders game.
Mhm.
That there's a chance he could latch on somewhere to a team who wants to carry 3 quarterbacks with the new rule, a team maybe who is
Mhm.
looking for, someone that can upgrade their backup quarterback position. It could be. I could definitely see him being claimed by a team if they were
Mhm.
interested. Rourke on the practice squad is interesting as well, as you mentioned. Bill's Pro says that too. So there are some options there that I do think would be better. That would be upgrades from a practice squad perspective over Matt Barkley. And like you said, if Barkley does go on IR, it's not like he's leaving the team.
Mhm.
He's still there, doesn't take up, I believe the IR spots don't count against your practice squad numbers. So um, that, yeah, that's interesting. I think all of this conversation is essentially centered around this like zone of games of potential that if Josh Allen were to get hurt, like there's a range of games that where once you get outside that range,
Mhm.
it's no longer going to matter. But if it's a minor thing, then it does matter more. But I think maybe even the practice squad conversation is maybe even more interesting than QB2 right now, because that could be someone that you then develop for future years and like set and forget as a practice squad guy, or maybe even a backup for the year beyond, right? In
Yeah.
2024.
I mean, we're gonna get into this more so as we get into other position groups, but you're the Buffalo Bills. You're competing for a Super Bowl. This is a win now type of situation for the Buffalo Bills. I would like a quarterback like a PJ Walker on the practice squad if Kyle Allen's going to be your number 2 quarterback. When we get to the offensive tackle conversation, it's probably going to be hard to trade for an offensive tackle at this point. Kelvin Beachum is locked into the swing role in Arizona. I really can't brainstorm any other names that would theoretically be on the market. It looks like Larry Borum is locked into the left guard role now in Chicago with the injury to Tevin Jenkins. Jason Peters should be on the line, and Jason Peters could be a veteran practice squad addition to the Buffalo Bills. Christian Kirksey was released by the Houston Texans. I don't think he's the kind of guy the Buffalo Bills are going to plug and play week 1, but he's certainly a guy that the Buffalo Bills should consider adding to the practice squad so that he could be available week 2, 3, 4, or 5 if Terrell Bernard, Tyrell Dotson, or AJ Klein don't work out. So the Buffalo Bills should be scanning for some of these veterans and looking to put some of them on their practice squad to have some security blankets at some of these
Mhm.
positions that are rather thin. And quarterback, right tackle, and linebacker are those 3 positions. All right, Dave, lock in. Who are your quarterbacks in your 53-man projection?
I do have Allen and Allen. I don't have the roster gymnastics for Kyle
Mhm.
Allen, as Matt Prino suggested, although I
Yeah.
wouldn't be
So
surprised.
so let's start with this. Like, we're just gonna make our 53-man projection what the team will look like on Wednesday or Thursday. Let's
Allen and
not worry
Allen.
about the roster gymnastics.
Allen and
We could do that, but let's not worry about that. I see a lot of the beat reporters doing that because they're trying to be like 100% correct with what's going to come across the wire tomorrow. Just tell us what the team's going to look like on Wednesday. Let's stick with that. So you have Allen and Allen. I'm going
Yep.
to go Josh Allen and Case Keenum. I think the
Okay.
Buffalo Bills will trade a 7th-round pick to the Houston Texans. I think that'll come across the wire tomorrow for
Okay.
Case Keenum. With CJ Stroud being named the starter, they have Davis Mills there as well. I think Case Keenum comes back to Buffalo to be their backup quarterback. All right, let's move on now to the skill positions. We're going to lump these in together: running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And we're going to start with the running back position. Is it safe to assume James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray are stone cold locks?
I think so. I mean, I think they have to be,
Mhm.
right? The Bills need 3 running backs on the roster. Um, I added Reggie Gilliam into the group as
Mhm.
well. But yes, I think
Yes.
those 3 are stone cold locks for sure.
Yeah, I'm ready to lock that in as well. James Cook, Damian Harris, Latavius Murray. And then I was going to save Reggie Gilliam for the tight end conversation, but I'll throw him in here as well. I'll throw in um, I'll throw in Reggie Gilliam. Is there any chance the Buffalo Bills consider a 4th traditional running back? Did Darrington Evans with his return ability and his big run yesterday? Did Ty Johnson with his running game on Saturday? Jordan Mims, I know he's been hurt, but he looked good early. Did any of those 3 guys sell the Buffalo Bills or convince them to keep a 4th traditional running back on the active roster?
I don't necessarily think they did it to keep a 4th traditional running back on the active roster. I think if anybody could have, it would have been Darrington Evans,
Mhm.
given his solid play against the Bears and his ability in the return game. But it's just the roster spots are so valuable right now. And even just going through this exercise, you realize how tough it is to put some of these guys off the roster. So I think Darrington Evans did enough to basically be maybe the first man on the practice squad, especially because he wasn't with the team. I don't think there'll be any issues getting him
Mhm.
back. And I think the Bills will pretty much say, look, if anything happens to, our return game, you're going to be the first guy up. If anything happens to one of our running backs, you're going to be the first guy up.
Do you have a favorite for the practice squad? Because I was leaning Ty Johnson, veteran experience. He's returned kicks before. He looked good yesterday in the preseason. It was unfortunate
He
that he got
did.
released from the Jets. It was a numbers game there, and he was
Mhm.
injured, working out. But Darrington Evans, never say die, right? He
Mhm.
made a claim for that spot. Do you have a favorite? Because I know you were a Darrington Evans guy in the draft a couple of seasons ago.
It's funny, right? Like, I think out of Evans, Ty Johnson, and Mims, I could see two of those guys making it.
Really?
My favorite is Evans, though.
Mm-hmm.
And for purposes of doing this, I only had Evans.
All
And I
right.
I, I hate to say that about because I do like Ty Johnson
Uh-huh.
as well, but obviously late addition. Him playing like sort of the tail end of that last preseason game, it kind of feels a bit like, hey, they were just kind of running the
Mm-hmm.
string out a bit to get through that game. But for me, Evans is my favorite right now, especially because he hasn't been with the team that long, but longer than Ty Johnson. So I'll give him the edge.
Yeah, I went with Ty Johnson as well on my mock practice squad here. I think the veteran experience really pushes it in his favor. There were a couple of names that were released today. I want to run them by you real quick. Obviously, the
Mm,
Buffalo Bills are not going to put either of these players on their active 53. They're not going to put in a waiver claim on them. But if these two players clear waivers, maybe the Buffalo Bills try to coax them or convince them to their practice squad. Another guy with some return experience, one of your favorites from a couple of years ago in the draft, from your alma mater, Bam Knight, was released
mm.
by the Jets. And my alma mater, Jarrett Patterson, was waived by the uh, Washington Commanders. I love Jarrett Patterson. I think his skill set might be too similar to Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, even though he's a smaller stature guy. He runs like a Harris or a Murray more so than maybe like a change of pace type of back. So I don't think Jarrett Patterson is in the cards, even though I love him as a running back. I hope he latches on somewhere. But Bam Knight is very much in the mold of Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans. Could the Buffalo Bills maybe try to coax him, even though he's got apparently some suitors?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth a shot, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that the more options you have, obviously, the better. The Bills, um, you know, you think it's a lot of spots, 16 for the practice squad, but you start looking at the roster, and that fills up quickly too. So it just depends, really. I think
Mm-hmm.
how comfortable the Bills would be with a guy like Evans or Ty Johnson. Is there an outside chance they keep two running backs on the practice squad? There could be that chance if those guys
Mm-hmm.
possess special teams and return ability. You could see that maybe being the case where if something happens to one of the three on the active roster, they don't really have like that Taiwan Jones sort of pseudo running
Mm-hmm.
back right anymore. So maybe it makes sense for them to potentially have two running backs on the practice squad, but I still think that might be a long shot.
All right, let's transition now to wide receiver. To me, these are the stone cold four: Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy. We can agree those four guys are making the team, right?
Yep, agreed.
I'm willing to call Justin Shorter a stone cold lock between his ability to gun on special teams, the fact that he was a fifth round draft pick, and the fact that he had a really good showing in that Pittsburgh Steelers game. I think Justin Shorter has done enough. I also think he's a roster lock. Would you agree with that as well?
He's on mine. Yep.
All right. So that leaves the wide receiver 6 position and maybe the wide receiver 6 and 7 position, depending on what the Buffalo Bills decide to do. To me, it's between two guys, former fifth round pick Khalil Shakir and training camp darling Andy Isabella. How do you have the last roster spot for a wide receiver shaking out, or are you adding a seventh wide receiver spot?
It really this was one of the hardest decisions I made.
Mhm.
I did end up going with Shakir over
Yep.
Isabella. That was just my gut's telling me that that's what the Bills will do.
Mhm.
I really like Andy Isabella. I do hope he finds his way back to the team somehow. If they do keep seven wide receivers, it seems like he would be the guy. Obviously, can give you something in the return game as well, and did have his moments and was a training camp
Yep.
darling. But I just feel like I don't think the Bills are ready to turn the page on Khalil Shakir
Mhm.
yet. I think it's just a little too early. So for me, I think Shakir, I wouldn't call him a stone cold lock, but man, he's like that in that 99%. I think
Yeah. I
he's as good of a lock as you can be without being a stone cold lock.
This is an option as well. Jessica Tennis comes in and says Shakir to IR. In my opinion, Isabella signed back. So you can cut Andy Isabella. You can bring Shakir onto the active roster. He's got that rib injury. You can then IR Khalil
Yep.
Shakir and bring him back after 4 or 5 weeks. And you
Yep.
can give Andy Isabella his shake. But the thing is Andy Isabella is not going to be active on game day, week 1, right? The Buffalo Bills have this influx of 12 personnel. They're going to have Reggie Gilliam active. They're going to have Quentin Morris active to go along with Dalton Kincaid. I think the Buffalo Bills are only going to have 5 active wide receivers on game day. And it's going to be Diggs, Davis, Sherfield, Hardy, and then Justin Shorter for his special teams. So even if Khalil Shakir was healthy and made the team, I still think Khalil Shakir is probably, depending on the matchups, a game day inactive.
Probably.
And
Yep.
he's more of like a developmental, almost red shirt type of guy who's there in case of injuries to anyone else above him on the depth chart. And Andy Isabella would be the same way. So he kind of cooled off towards the end of the preseason. I know he was a former second round pick, so he's going to have maybe some attention to him, but I just don't think that Andy Isabella is going to have anyone really clamoring for his services. You're right. I think they could get Andy Isabella back on the practice squad. So I went with Khalil Shakir as my wide receiver 6 as well. I put Andy Isabella and I put Tyrell Shavers on my practice squad. Keyshawn Johnson, Tyrell Shavers, Marcel Aitman, Brian Thompson. Those are the ones who are left. You could throw Des Patman in there as well. I think Isaiah Coulter's about done. And
Yep.
who are your practice squad wide receivers? It's likely the Buffalo Bills probably keep 2. That's what they've done traditionally.
I had Andy Isabella and Tyrell Shavers on mine. Those were the 2.
Mhm.
I really wanted to find a way to get either Keyshawn Johnson or Marcel Aitman. I thought Marcel Aitman looked pretty good in some of the
Mhm.
reps he had. The Bills just really like they're deep, right, at wide receiver, and but there's only so many practice squad spots to go around. So I had Isabella and Shavers.
All right, let's move on to tight end now. Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid. We can both agree those are stone cold locks. Quentin Morris. Are you willing to call him a stone cold lock, or is he a bubble player to you?
I think when they do like the NCAA tournament and they do like last 4 in or whatever.
Yeah.
he's not in the I don't think he's the last 4 in, but I think he's like the next 4, like
So he's like a soft lock.
he's like
Or
a
are you
soft.
thinking he's not going to make the team? What are you
No,
saying?
I'm thinking like he's not in the bottom 4, like
Mhm.
last 4 in, but he's close to that.
Okay.
So he's in that like
Mhm.
high 40s if you're like counting the roster, like he's
Yeah.
in the like, high 40s range of like guys making the team, but I do think he's on the team and I have him making the team.
Yeah, I agree. You're a football team looking to run more 12 personnel. So if one of your tight ends goes down, you're going to need another tight end on the roster. I know you have Reggie Gilliam as well. He really has shown up. I mean, Eric and Anthony have been clipping some clips. Like he has been showing up as a run blocker too, getting in there and getting aggressive, doing what Aaron Cromer wants to see. I took a little flack on social media because I tweeted, Quentin Morris needed that touchdown. He was having a shaky preseason. I got lit up. You got to be careful with the way you word things on social media these days because my mind, when I tweeted that, I was like, well, he had a drop in the first game and he had a false start penalty in the second game and he didn't have a single catch. So catching that touchdown, I thought was big for him in preseason games. But by all accounts in training camp, all the beat reporters were there day after day after day. It was what a catch by Morris, touchdown by Morris, another 2 touchdown day by Morris. It was just Morris. He was one of the talks of training camp as Pops Mafia comes in and says he looked great at training camp. So I agree. I think that he is a lock as well. So it appears that we have Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, and Quentin Morris. Both of us have them locked in at the tight end position. Practice squad tight end, Jay Sternberger versus Joel Wilson. I think it's going to end up being Joel Wilson. I wish it was Jay Sternberger just because I really like Jay Sternberger as a project, but it appears like Joel Wilson has surpassed him on the depth chart. He's the one still on the roster while Sternberger was an earlier cut. Where's your money at for the practice squad tight end?
I mean, right now I have to go Joel Wilson, right? Just based on the mathematics. So yeah, he's the only one I have, and obviously they have Davidson on IR, so nothing to do there. But yeah, Joe Wilson would be the practice squad guy for me at the moment.
All right, let's move on to one of the more polarizing position groups, and that is the offensive line. And I was listening to the Bill Steelers post game show with Greg and Anth, and I sat there and I was just laughing the whole time because they were talking about the embarrassment of riches the Buffalo Bills had on the interior of the offensive line, like just like 8-9 guys deep, and then like we're barely too deep at offensive tackle. So some decisions are going to have to be made. I'm pretty sure Brandon Beane is going to be working the phones, maybe trying to bring an offensive tackle from outside the organization in to secure the swing tackle spot. But chances are there's probably not going to be very many guys who are available because there aren't very many good offensive linemen in the National Football League. They are valuable commodities. So Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, let's start with offensive tackles. To me, they are stone cold locks. To you, I know they're stone cold locks. They're the starters. Who do you have as your third and maybe even fourth offensive tackle making this football team?
Yeah, I have David Quessenberry reluctantly making the team, and I have Ryan Van DeMark also making the team. I do have Alec Anderson making the team, whether you want to call him a tackle, guard, set, whatever. So whatever, we can throw him in whatever group you want. Our lads officially has him listed as a right guard. I think the Bills have him as a guard, but
on the roster, on the official roster, he's listed as a tackle.
Okay.
He's been playing most of training camp at guard and center. He got the first reps I'd seen of him at right tackle in that game against the Bears, and he got cooked for the strip sack.
So I'll save him for the next conversation though. So as far as true tackles, I suppose I do have Quessenberry and Van DeMark as the third and fourth. I did, yes, reluctantly keep Quessenberry on the roster just because, like, what are you gonna do at this stage? Like, unless you make a trade, or unless you really think Richard Garage is the better option to start this season at tackle, like, I don't know what other options you have right now if you're the Buffalo Bills other than calling Jason Peters up and having him on the practice squad for a couple weeks.
And I'm all for that. Like, I legitimately think the Buffalo Bills should call up Jason Peters, offer him a practice squad spot, let him see what he's got for the first couple of weeks of the season, and then activate him to the 53 if you feel like he's still got something left in the tank, or activate him to the 53 if there's an injury. Maybe just keep him on the practice squad all year unless there's an injury. I'm game for that because the only name out there is Kelvin Beachum. I don't think you're going to be able to wiggle him out of Arizona. Bobby Hart got released by the Lions. That's a no-go for us. We both know that. Jerron Christian got cut by the Dolphins. I've always liked him, but when you get cut by the Dolphins, that probably says a lot about where you're at in your career. Connor Galvin is a younger tackle that I like, but he's in the Richard Garage type of situation where he's a developmental tackle. He's not really a plug-and-play ready guy. So I went with 3 offensive tackles. I did not put David Quessenberry on the roster. I'm reading some tea leaves. There have been 3 beat reporters over the last 2 days that have put out 53-man roster projections with the guy you just mentioned, Alec Anderson, on it. I think the Buffalo Bills roll with Ryan Van DeMark as their swing tackle. I think he's the left tackle, right tackle backup. I think they know that they have Ryan Bates who can play right tackle in a pinch if needed. Alec Anderson can play right tackle in a pinch if needed. I think the Buffalo Bills look at the talent that they have at offensive tackle and say, it's just not worth carrying 4 guys. So I'm going with 3 guys, Dawkins, Brown, and Ryan Van DeMark. And then I'm going to go heavy on the interior when we get to the interior, because as I mentioned, a couple of those guys can swing in at tackle. So let's move to the interior now. Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, Mitch Morse, those are locks. Ryan Bates, David Edwards, locks. So now between Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, Ryan Van DeMark, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, Mitch Morse, Ryan Bates, David Edwards, we're now at 8 guys. Do the Bills go 9? Do the Bills go 10? The options are, as you mentioned, Richard Garage, who we believe is a practice squad candidate, Alec Anderson, Nick Broker, Ike Butker, and I think it's safe to say Greg Manx and Kevin Jarvis will not be members of this football team come Wednesday. What are your thoughts on either the 9th offensive line spot or the 10th offensive line spot if you decide to keep 2?
Yeah, well, I had Quessenberry, right? And so I did have Alec Anderson as well. So that I have 10 offensive linemen on mine. Ike Bucker's a good story, but I just don't think he's making the team this year. And Nick Broker, as much as I love him, he seems prime for a practice squad spot along with Richard Garage. So to me, Garage and Broker kind of headline your young developmental practice squad linemen. And if you want to throw, Bucker and Manx on the practice squad as well, but be my guest. But I do have them keeping 10 offensive linemen. And although I do think that there is a strong possibility that we do see Connor McGovern go on IR once the roster's set.
Yeah, that Connor McGovern injury is still a question mark. I feel really comfortable and confident with David Edwards at left guard. I thought he played great against the Bears. There were some good highlights of him in that game. I'm going to go 9. As I mentioned, I'm going to give that 9th spot to Alec Anderson. Him and Bates can both play right tackle in a pinch. You have Vandermark to swing, even though you might not really feel all that confident with him at right tackle. And then I think the practice squad is going to end up Richard Garage. I think it's going to end up Nick Broker. And then I think that you will see the Buffalo Bills go out and find some kind of veteran offensive tackle to
Let's hope
be
so.
on the practice squad. And there's
Let's
a security.
hope so.
Maybe, it might just be David Questenberry. You have David Questenberry making the active roster.
Yeah.
Maybe the Buffalo Bills try to allocate David Questenberry to the practice squad.
Maybe.
I don't think there's going to be much of a market for him. So the Buffalo Bills might consider that.
Yeah.
All right. So we are now on to the defense and the defensive line. This one is tricky because let's start with the Von Miller conversation. Well, before we get into anything else, let's start with Von Miller. I'm making a bold prediction here. I'm putting Von Miller on my 53. I think the Buffalo Bills will not PUP him. I do not think he'll play week 1 in the Meadowlands, but I think he'll be back before week 5. So I think the Buffalo Bills carry Von Miller onto their active 53. What is your take on Von Miller?
I didn't have them carrying him on the 53. I do have them PUPing him, and I think that I think from a roster standpoint, it's like the ultimate thing here is that Von's ready for the home stretch, second half of the season and the playoffs. Now I know you need him to help you get to the playoffs, but the schedule really is tough the second half of the year. I think that if you're really wanting to make sure he's ready to go, you have Leonard Floyd, you have some other options that we're about to talk about. And I think it's tough because I think he'll be ready by like week 2 or 3, but I also don't know if the Bills want to necessarily, I don't want to call it burn a roster spot for him to not necessarily play for a couple weeks when they could use those guys those first couple games. So for me, I have him on PUP. This is an interesting conversation. I think if he is on the 53, it makes the rest of the decisions that much harder, I think. And good for you for going down that route because I didn't, maybe I was just too scared to do it. I don't know, but I mean, good for you.
My thought process is we can't get Von Miller back soon enough. He's looked good. I mean, if you're the Buffalo Bills and the trainers are telling you like he could be ready week 2, he could be ready week 3. I mean, don't waste him for 4 weeks just for the sake of wasting him. If the doctors tell you he's good to go, he's good to go. So it'll be really interesting to see what the doctors say. And we'll get that answer tomorrow because if the doctors aren't confident, then he will be placed on that PUP list. I mean, I have Shaq Lawson going to the practice squad. So if Von Miller is pupped, then Shaq Lawson just doesn't get released. And Shaq Lawson starts the season with the Buffalo Bills. But this is where things get interesting if you are the Buffalo Bills. Rousseau and Floyd, they're the locks. They're the 2 players that I feel very confident will be on the Buffalo Bills on Wednesday. It's easy to say guys like Epinesa and Basham are locks, but also there's like a chance that there's a logjam here. There's a chance that maybe one of these guys gets traded, and there has been a late push. Kingsley Jonathan has looked amazing this preseason, and he has been claimed before. Cameron Klein has made a late push. Eric Washington talked about how impressed he was with Cameron Klein. Our special teams coordinator has talked about how impressive Klein has been on special teams. So legitimately, Kingsley Jonathan or Cameron Klein could make this 53-man roster, and you could see a player like Shaq Lawson off, and you could see a player like AJ Epinesa or Boogie Basham traded. How do you think it's all going to shake out at the end of the day? Obviously, Rousseau, Floyd are the locks. Who are the other 3-4 guys behind them that you have making the football team?
Yeah, so I had Vaughn on the pup. So for
Hmm.
me, I had obviously Floyd and Rousseau. I did have Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa both on the team. And at the end of the day, I mean, I put a poll out today on Twitter. It's
Hmm.
got about 600 votes on it already, and it was deciding between whether to keep Shaq Lawson or Kingsley Jonathan as my fifth defensive end. And ultimately, I went with Shaq Lawson.
Hmm.
But I could be swayed for Kingsley Jonathan. In the
Hmm.
poll results, we had 587 votes as of right now. Pretty close, 57% Shaq Lawson, 43% Kingsley Jonathan. So pretty split across 600 votes there. You have a lot of opinions both ways. Most of the, I'll kind of summarize the opinion. Most of the opinions were for those who voted for Shaq was we love his run defense. We love that he's
Hmm.
been with the team. We love that he's played a lot of meaningful NFL snaps and he's been there and done that and can help the run D, especially in situation now where we know we might have an undersized linebacker in
Hmm.
the group, that adding a little bit of extra help on the run defense is not a bad thing. On the other side, the arguments for Kingsley Jonathan were as much as he's flashed in the preseason, someone who gives you more of a pass rush pop than a guy like Shaq Lawson and maybe has a little bit higher of a ceiling
Hmm.
and an unknown. So good arguments for both ways. I ultimately went with Shaq Lawson mainly because of the steadying presence in the
Hmm.
run defense. So I went with Shaq as that and hope that Kingsley Jonathan can make it back.
Yeah. Like I said, I had Von Miller on my 53-man roster. So I went with Rousseau, Floyd, and then I went with Epinesa and Basham. I went with the 2 draft picks. I earmarked all 3 of these guys, though, for the practice squad, and Shaq Lawson, um, in Kingsley Jonathan and Cameron Klein.
Yep.
As Jessica Tennis pointed out, a lot of these guys are off the books next year. So there is another chance next year for Kingsley Jonathan. There's another chance next year for Cameron Klein. Injuries happen. You're going to want a sturdy vet in Shaq Lawson. So if these guys don't get claimed off of waivers, I could see a world where the Buffalo Bills keep all these guys on the practice squad just for the fact that they're going to want Lawson for in season if needed. And they're going to want these other 2 guys for the future, because some contracts come off the book. So tough decision, man. And that's why it would not shock me if one of Epinesa Basham is traded. It would not shock me if that's something that comes down the wire tomorrow.
Basham
Because
seems like an obvious trade candidate
mhm.
given that he's
But
still
AJ's
under.
the contract year, though.
Yeah,
That's the tough part. I think the
but
Bills coaching staff does like Epinesa more.
well, and I think Epinesa right now is
Mhm.
just like I wouldn't even say they're even that. I think he's significantly outperforming but Basham right at this
Mhm.
stage, and I think he's valuable to the success of the team this year. I feel like he's had a really good camp. He's made some nice plays in the preseason. I think the appeal of Basham is that he does have another year left, and that teams
Yep.
might find that attractive, that he still has another year beyond 2023 left on his contract. And maybe that presents a bit of value to a team who's looking maybe to acquire him. So, I could see both sides of that, but I would personally rather have AJ Epinesa for the Bills to contribute in
Mhm.
2023.
Defensive tackle now. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, those are obviously stone cold locks. They're going to be your starters on day one. I think Jordan Phillips is a lock. And then it's safe to assume that Puna Ford and Tim Settle are locks, but it's also like 5 defensive ends, 5 defensive tackles. Some of these guys aren't going to be active on game day. Could the Buffalo Bills look to trade Puna Ford? Could the Buffalo Bills look to trade Tim Settle? I think if a trade doesn't happen, I think that both those guys are on the roster and we go with 5. My prediction is all 5 of these guys make it, but it wouldn't shock me if one of these guys gets traded before Wednesday.
I have all 5 making it. I
Mhm.
think, yes, this is one area where I'm like very gun shy on making a trade just because of what happened,
Yeah,
the
last year.
domino effect of what happened last year. Like I don't want to give away
Mhm.
depth unless it's something like you like if the Bills theoretically could trade Puna Ford for some like really above average tackle, like okay, but I just don't see
Yeah.
that happening, right? So to me, the most valuable Puna Ford is on the roster.
Mhm.
rather than a trade. So I do have all 5, and that that gives me 10 total defensive linemen making the team, and I have 10
Yeah.
offensive line, 10 defensive line.
I'm with you. I only had 9 offensive line, but I did go 10 defensive line. The only difference between me and you was you had Shaq Lawson, I had Von Miller. All right. Eli Anku, he looked good. I think he's going to be earmarked for the practice squad again, one of the veterans in the practice squad. So the Buffalo Bills are really 6 deep at defensive tackle. It's a good problem to have, especially considering the issues the Buffalo Bills had last year. All right. Now on to the linebacker position, if this is something that we want to talk about. And this is another one where you might want to look outside the organization, you know, but at the same time, if a team has a good linebacker, the chances of them wanting to trade that good linebacker are very rare. Like Detroit has a surplus of middle linebackers. Could they trade Alex Anzalone? Could they trade our guy, Malcolm Rodriguez? Probably not, unless you really blow them away with a trade offer. Why? Because they want depth at that position. The
Mm-hmm.
Chicago Bears have Tremaine Edmonds and they have TJ Edwards. Could they look to trade Jack Sanborn? Yeah, but he's also got 3 years left on his contract, super cheap, and he's a great depth piece. The Detroit Lions and Chicago Bears both feel like they're contenders this year. Why would they trade valuable depth unless you're really willing to pony up? So it really appears like the Buffalo Bills are shit out of luck in
Mm-hmm.
terms of trying to add a linebacker from outside the organization, unless that person is Christian Kirksey. And we'll get to
Yeah.
Christian Kirksey in a moment. But Milano, Bernard, and Dorian Williams, those are the 3 stone cold locks. And then we have to go from there. Before we go from there, what are your thoughts on Christian Kirksey? Does he factor into this equation at all?
I think he should, right? To me, he's like
Mhm.
a better replacement type of guy than AJ Klein, right? Like I
Mhm.
think like AJ Klein's like the veteran presence that you brought in, has the size, maybe has lost a little bit athletically, but I do think I mean Kirksey, I think, is an upgrade over AJ Klein. I think he's someone you could bring in. The Bills have shown interest in him in the past. Maybe he's not, like you said, active week 1 or 2, but maybe by the time, third, fourth week of the season rolls around, maybe, Terrell Bernard or Dorian Williams,
Mhm.
or maybe Dorian Williams doesn't have a shot yet, but maybe Terrell Bernard's struggling. You have a guy like Kirksey who can come in and kind of fill that gap a bit. So I do think he's in the equation. Obviously, I don't think I'm ready to predict him on my Wednesday
Yep.
roster yet, but it could be a factor.
Yeah. Christian Kirksey's interesting because this is a player that played with Micah Hyde in Green Bay. This is a player the Buffalo Bills pursued 2 years ago. Um, you know, I retweeted a cover 1 tweet. He was in Buffalo for a visit a couple of seasons ago. The Buffalo Bills had interest in him. As a player now at 30 years old, it's interesting because one of our cover 1 guys, Adam, shared a tweet that like he's got a really positive EPA per play on the field compared to when he's off the field for the Houston Texans. So it shows that he makes an impact on the field. But at the same time, PFF has given him really negative grades like the last 4 seasons. Eric fired up the tape and he said there was some good, but he definitely is showing his age and there might be a little bit of a lack of an effort. So you don't know what you're getting with Christian Kirksey. You're probably going to get that savvy, heady vet. He might be a little bit more motivated playing on a contender as compared to playing on the Houston Texans, but the Buffalo Bills run a complex defense. I can't picture a situation where Christian Kirksey gets signed onto the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster before Wednesday. I don't think he's part of the Bills 53-man roster plan. Now, I do think that there's a world where the Buffalo Bills call up Christian Kirksey and say, hey, come join our practice squad. Come here for 3-4 weeks, get used to our system, and then we'll elevate you to the 53-man roster. So I do think that there's a place for Christian Kirksey, but I don't think that place is on the 53-man roster because when you look at it, the Buffalo Bills are doing one of 2 things week 1. They're either rolling out Terrell Bernard, and they're going to have a backup plan because Terrell Bernard has not played at all this preseason. You don't know what you're going to get with Terrell Bernard outside of what the Buffalo Bills coaching staff has seen in practice, or the Buffalo Bills are going to roll out Tyrell Dotson or AJ Klein. And in that situation, the backup job is going to be Terrell Bernard's because they're going to hope that over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, Terrell Bernard works his way into that role if AJ Klein or Tyrell Dotson fall on their face, which they probably will. So I really just don't see a situation where Christian Kirksey makes the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster in the next week. But I do
Yeah.
think a practice squad spot would make logical sense for him.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair approach. You see how things kind of shake out. If it's really looking grim and that happens, like, sure, like it's a pretty low risk move for the Bills, right? And you have room if you need to make room on the
Mhm.
practice squad. So, but I'm with you. I don't think this week
Mhm.
we would see that. That seems a little soon.
So the next question that I have for you with the linebackers is, I think Balon Spector is going to make the 53-man roster, but I think it's going to be one of those roster jumble things where Balon Spector makes it, and then Wednesday you see him placed on short-term injured reserve because he's got that hamstring injury. He's going to be out weeks. So you'll probably see Balon Spector make the team, but then you're going to see Balon Spector quickly put on injured reserve with that injury. So the next question is, we're going to move on to the rest of the linebackers: Tyrell Dodson, AJ Klein, Tyler Matakevich, and you can even throw Traven Howard in there if you want to. Do the Buffalo Bills go 5 deep at linebacker? Do the Buffalo Bills go 6 deep at linebacker? Do the Buffalo Bills go 7 deep at linebacker? And if so, who makes the team? I really hope they don't go 7.
Um, History would say they're going 6.
Mhm.
Because I kept an extra offensive lineman, I only put 5 on mine because I
Yeah.
didn't really have a choice.
Mhm.
So the way I work this is I actually had Balon Spector going to IR now, missing the season, going on
Mhm.
season-ending IR. Again, he only appeared in 6 games last year. I know the Bills probably want to have him for defense this year because he does bring an element of size and athleticism that they don't necessarily have at that middle linebacker spot, but they also have used Dorian Williams at the mic in preseason. They are expecting Terrell Bernard back, and unfortunately, um, I don't think Tyrell Dodson's going anywhere, as much as it
Mhm.
pains me to say. So I only have 5. I think in my heart, I feel like they are going to keep 6, but I'm going with 5 for this just because I
Yeah.
had to. So I do have it as Bernard, Milano, Dorian Williams, um, Tyrell Dodson, and who am I missing? Matakevich as my 5.
Yeah, I went with 6 as well, and who knows, maybe even Dorian Williams gets put on short-term IR. I don't really know the extent of his injury, so that could free up a spot. I really wanted to go 5 linebackers. I did. I went 6 because I think the Buffalo Bills are going to go 6. Milano, I had Klein, I had Bernard, I had Dorian Williams, I had Tyrell Dodson, and then I had Taylor Matakevich. So I think that you're going to see, this is the situation I think is going to play out week 1. I think either Bernard is going to start, and then you'll have AJ Klein or Tyrell Dodson sort of at the ready, one of the two, because the other one's going to be inactive, at the ready to come in if that just blows up in the Bills' face, because we haven't seen Terrell Bernard yet. Or you'll have AJ Klein or Tyrell Dodson starting with Terrell Bernard at the ready, if one of those two, and maybe they work him into drives and series, etc., as the game goes along. So it'll be really interesting to see how the middle linebacker job plays out. I think for the sake of just having a bunch of darts to throw at the board, I think the Bills are going to save Klein, Bernard, and Dodson all on the 53-man roster. So I had them going with 6. Unfortunately, it pains me. If I was an NFL GM, if I was an NFL head coach, which I'm not, and it's a good thing I'm not, because you wouldn't want me running any organization, I would have 5. And I think a lot of people here are in agreement with that as well. If you can't teach Tyrell Dodson and Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard to tackle on special teams as good as Taylor Matakevich, I don't know what to tell you. Find a new special teams coach. Like, it's that simple. He should not be on the roster. He shouldn't.
Mhm.
It's an absolute waste of a roster spot.
Yep.
All right. On to the second. I'm going to get a lot of flack in the Cover One group chat if anyone's listening to that. Aaron Quinn will light me up. Uber will light me up. I don't care. That's my stance. All right. On to the secondary now. And this is where it gets interesting because there's a lot of talent here. Let's start at corner. Trey White, safe. Christian Benford, safe. Dane Jackson, safe. Kyrie Elam, safe. Teron Johnson, safe. Saran Neal, what are your thoughts on Saran
Safe.
Neal? I think he's
Safe.
safe as well. I think he
Safe.
is safe as well. He's just one of the better special teamers in the National Football League. I think he made enough plays this preseason to maybe prove that he can be the backup nickel behind Teron Johnson. You also have Taylor Rapp you can throw into that role if you need it. I put an asterisk next to Kyrie Elam. And the reason why I put an asterisk next to Kyrie Elam is because there's 2 trains of thoughts with Kyrie Elam. There's the train of thought where you pretty much make him inactive every week of the season sans injury, because that's what's going to happen. If Kyrie Elam, when Kyrie Elam makes this team, you're probably going to see him inactive almost every single week unless there's an injury. And it's going to almost be like a redshirt year. And unless Christian Benford or Dane Jackson fall on their face or Kyrie Elam shows something in practice, if he is the fourth boundary corner, he's probably going to be inactive every week. But Dane Jackson's contract is up. Trey White will be another year older next year, and Kyrie Elam can have another stab at the CB2 job in 2024. He's only 23 years old. Development is not linear. Sometimes it just takes some time with players. So there's that way of looking at Kyrie Elam. The other way of looking at Kyrie Elam is, oh my goodness, Dane Jackson and Christian Benford have now beaten him out for 2 years in a row. The Buffalo Bills just do not know how to handle his skill set because he's just this physical, aggressive man corner when they're used to having these drop back zone type of corners. And some people have said, like, do you cut bait? Do you trade him while his value is the highest? What are your thoughts on dangling Kyrie Elam in the trade market? I'm personally opposed to it. I would rather have him there as the depth. I would rather have him there for next season. Maybe he works his way into the lineup over the course of the season. I'm not ready to give up on Kyrie Elam yet, but what are your thoughts?
I wouldn't even say that his value is the highest right now. So I don't think that you're really gonna.
He's played well in games though. Like he's had
Yeah.
so many highlight reel plays in games. That's the thing.
I think if you're the
It's
coaching
crazy.
staff and what you've been able to do, yes, predominantly coaching up zone type corners, but like if you're going to hang your hat on coaching the secondary and you've hung your hat on making, not household names, but making guys who are 6th, 7th round UDFA type guys serviceable starters in the
Mhm.
NFL, like to me, you need to find a way to leverage Kyrie Elam, what he does best, right? And like
Mhm.
that to me, obviously there's a lot that's on Kyrie's shoulders himself, but there is some of this is on the coaching staff as well, right? So I think it's a mix. And then Kyrie even came out and said, like, this is the first time he's ever struggled playing football, right? Like he's never really faced a ton of adversity as far as like being
Mhm.
in competition or like not being the best guy on the field. So like the Bills have no real choice but to continue to try to find ways to make it work with him in that hope that maybe as the season progresses again that he finds a groove. So I'm against trading him. I
Mhm.
will be for the foreseeable future. And so it's you just have to find a way to use him and use his strengths if you're the coaching staff. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
All right. So that leaves the Buffalo Bills with 6 corners on the roster. Do they keep a 7th? Cam Lewis, obviously, there was this big deal made about earlier in this preseason where the Bills sat Tron Johnson because their backup nickel, Cam Lewis, was already hurt, and they didn't want both their nickels to be hurt, which was kind of like the big hoopla surrounding Saran Neal. Like, oh, do the Bill staff not have faith in Saran Neal on defense? What does this mean? Is Cam Lewis a lock? That sort of softened, especially with Cam Lewis's injury and how long it's taken him to get back. Jamarcus Ingram has looked exceptional in the preseason. I mean, that guy is just a freaking hit stick.
Mm-hmm.
He's fun, and I think he's going to be earmarked for the practice squad. But keeping a 7th cornerback would mean keeping 11 DBs. Is that something that you have on your 53-man prediction, or is a guy like Cam Lewis? Is it cross your fingers and hope he makes it to the practice squad?
Well, I only have 4 spots left once you reserve 3 for the
Mhm.
special teams guys. So I don't have Cam Lewis on the team, and my remaining 4 spots are going to the safeties. So I don't have him on the team. He was probably like my last 1 or 2 guys that didn't make it. Him and Kingsley Jonathan were probably the last 2 guys out for me. But I did not have him make it, and it just became a numbers game for me on this one. So unfortunately, not on my final 53.
Yeah, same here. I have Cam Lewis, I have Jamarcus Ingram, and I have Alex Austin all earmarked for the practice squad. Maybe all of them can't make the practice squad. That would be unfortunate because I liked Alex Austin, even though he's at a quiet training camp. Again, development isn't linear. I think he's a guy who maybe a year in the system, a year in the practice squad could make some noise next year, especially with Dane Jackson's contract coming off the books and the Buffalo Bills can't re-sign him. So it'd be really interesting to see how the Buffalo Bills manage that practice squad in the secondary. And that leads us to safety now. I mean, this one's pretty simple, right? Hyde, Poyer, Rapp, Hamlin. There's some train of thought to DeMar Hamlin doesn't make this football team, and Cam Lewis makes this football team as the 4th safety / backup nickel. I feel like DeMar Hamlin's probably quieted that with his preseason. He's looked pretty solid, with the exception of that one missed tackle on DJ Moore. What are your thoughts on DeMar Hamlin's preseason and whether he wraps up that final spot in the secondary?
I think he's wrapped it up. I think he's played solidly in the preseason. I also think that optics wise, like it, you don't want to use that as an excuse, but I think like it makes a ton of sense for him to make the team. Just football, he's played really good football, and like the fact is like what happened to him is not a factor anymore on his ability to play football right now, right? So like he's not he's not taking it easy, he's not doing anything, right? He's playing all out like he said he would, and that's showing in his play. I feel like he's playing really well, and to me he's locked it up. I think the Bills do have a little bit of a question mark as far as like who their sort of backup center fielder truly is, because I feel like they really have three strong safeties and a free safety in that group. More or less. I know they can all kind of interchange, but you don't really have that traditional two free safety, two strong safety type of makeup in the group anymore. So I do think Hamlin's there. I think he's the fourth safety, obviously, along with Poyer, Hyde, and Rapp. So those would be the four guys that round out. For me on the defense, that gives me 25 on offense, 25 on defense, and then the three special teamers. Obviously.
Yeah, the special teams is pretty easy to predict. The Buffalo Bills did not bring in any challengers this year for Reed Ferguson, for Tyler Bass, or for Sam Martin. Sam Martin had a kick blocked or a pump blocked this preseason, and Tyler Bass missed a kick. So anything to be concerned about?
No, I did see that, and I was like, oh, of course he's gonna have that bad taste in his mouth for
heading
into
the season. Yeah.
So it's like, damn it, like he couldn't just end on a make, but nah, it's all right. I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, and Reed Ferguson will probably be cut tomorrow for those who are unaware. I think for the most part, the Cover One guys and other people have done a pretty good job. The beat reporters have done a pretty good job explaining the salary cap gymnastics that go around the 53-man roster cut day. Reed Ferguson will probably be cut tomorrow. The Buffalo Bills will carry another player onto the roster, Balon Spector, whatever, Connor McGovern. They'll IR them, and then they'll bring Reed Ferguson back on Wednesday. So obviously the Buffalo Bills are going to go into the season with their long snapper, who made an appearance on Good Morning America this morning with his Q42 barbecue brand. He was cooking it up with the Good Morning America folks today. So that was pretty cool to see. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that'll just about do it for this evening. Before we head out, Dave, did you hear the Steve Tasker story on One Bills Live today?
I did not know what happened.
Marv, he was having dinner with Marv Levy in Chicago. Marv Levy still kicking it at like 97 years old or something like that. Legend. And I guess when Marv Levy got his job at Cal in California, University of California, Berkeley, he got the job because he was suggested to the California Berkeley staff by one Robert Oppenheimer.
Wow.
of the obviously Robert Oppenheimer was famous, but now he's even more famous because of that movie that came out this summer. So Marv Levy and Robert Oppenheimer with that
connection,
there,
6 degrees of separation there. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a pretty crazy story. Before we head out tonight, I just logged in for my fantasy draft tonight. I had not checked my order. I'm picking 12, so frick me. I hate it, dude. Every year I get shafted in fantasy football. I'm 12th in my league here that I'm picking. So just like we got shafted in our underdog league, I was 11th, you were 12th. Unbelievable.
12th. Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, big day tomorrow. Stay tuned to our social media at the Bills Guys. Also, make sure the weekly challenge, when this video is over, comment on this video with your hottest roster take heading into cutdown day tomorrow. That way, if you're right, you can screenshot it and share it for the world to see. And if you're wrong, you can just delete it and pretend like it never happened. So, Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure. We finally get to start off next week with our pregame show. We get to bring the graphics back. The videos aren't back. You can thank YouTube for that. But we can finally bring back
what are we going to do
starting next week?
Are we going to do, is Monday going to be, because we have 2 weeks, right, for the game.
Yeah.
Do we
take it back.
Our NFL predictions,
NFL prediction show next week. I take that back. I just wanted football to be here. Yep. I forgot that we actually have a show to do next week without any football. So yeah, next Monday will be our our annual NFL prediction show. We'll pick what we think will be the division winners. We'll pick our Super Bowl winners, etc. And I'm sure there will be some Bills news that we can talk about at the top of the show as well.
Yep. Recapping the 53-man roster and such. Maybe, who knows? Christian Kirksey could be a Bill by then. We'll see.
All right. So, ladies and gents, thank you so much. We appreciate it. As always, this show would be absolutely nothing without you guys in the comment section. You make this show what it is. And until next time, ladies and gents, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!